Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this week's edition of the Valley View with our guest this week, Scott Bassett, who's going to be talking about the third bridge over the Willamette. So welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you.
And so, you know, we'll periodically hear something about the third bridge. And, you know, I've had this conversation on this show about the third bridge from the planning department. But I wanted to get more information than what the planning department was willing to give. So maybe you could give us some background on where we are and currently and what's happened, actually what's led up to this discussion about the third bridge, where we are today and what we should see in the future.
Yeah, Ken, thank you. You know, I think Salem is always going to be talking about a third bridge. You know, they're always going to be talking about the next bridge. And that's been the case for as long as I can remember, so that there's always going to be this debate about, do we need another crossing? Most urban areas have more than just one point to cross between two sections of the city. In Salem, we have an hourglass floodplain where there's only one narrow spot, and as you go south, you run into Minto Brown Park, and it gets very wide.
Yes.
As you run to the north, it also widens out so that just 1 mile to the north of the existing bridges, it's about 11 times wider than what it is at the narrow point. So what's happened is that the city of Salem and the region have, about every 10 years, gotten really serious about, we need a bridge. We got a plan for a bridge. And in 1974, they looked at the alternatives, even including one at what's proposed now, which is a bridge that would be at Pine Street on the east side of the river and would connect over to West Salem. And Pine Street is just about a mile from the existing bridges on the north. And so in 1974, they looked at that and they concluded that it was too expensive to put a bridge across the river there because it's so wide. And that was a time when we had 90% federal money available. And so a group looked at it in the 80s. Groups have looked at it repeatedly. This current effort started in 2006. And it was supposed to be a 2-year effort to identify the location and the funding for a new bridge. And in 2008, when it was due, they said, we don't know where exactly and what sort of design we're going to have, so we would like to be able to spend more time on it. And we don't know how it's going to be paid for. And so now we're in the 7th year of a 2-year planning process. And so we can talk about the basics of what's planned, and then we can talk about the money a little bit.
Well, I mean, obviously somebody wants this bridge. Otherwise they wouldn't have this conversation after not even producing anything from this 2-year study supposedly they have had. So there's some sort of driving force behind this.
Yeah. And
so what is that force that's driving the discussion about having another bridge?
Yeah, I think that people just really think that it's required for Salem to be able to grow in the future. They think that in order for West Salem to build out to the urban growth boundary, that you would need more than the existing 2 bridges. And what the 2 existing bridges get us now, they're 4 lanes in each direction. They get you 8 lanes worth of travel. And they are poorly used. We have a peak hour that lasts from about 5 to 6 in the evenings, and it's around 8 o'clock in the mornings. For 22 or 21 hours, that bridge is completely open and ready to use. So we're really talking about how do you address a peak hour problem. The proposal is to spend $400 million And when you think about how much money that is, $400 million, there are only 27,000 households in Polk County. And Polk County would need to fund this, and
As
others
well,
would too.
yeah.
But just for the magnitude of the size of how much $400 million is, it's about $15,000 per household in Polk County is what it would cost to build a $400 million bridge if they were the only ones to pay for it. But the reality is, the community feels, the development community feels like maybe there'll be federal money, maybe there'll be state money, and the project that looked at the feasibility, they spent these 7 years studying it, concluded that there wasn't a good source of federal money.
No.
There isn't a good source of state money. And so it comes back to this has to be predominantly funded by local resources. And so when you start thinking about what are those local resources, a toll would be about 50 cents each way for a $400 million bridge, and it would I think just be a non-starter. People would say, there's no way you're gonna have a toll to connect two parts of the same city.
Well, not to mention, if you've got a gridlock situation, which you really don't have on this bridge, you would create one if you had tolls.
They do electronic tolling now, and so there's infrastructure there that's expensive.
Yeah, well, yes, you would have but I would still think you would get some slowing down because of it, because not everybody is going to be on that electronic system, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a group that is responsible for making a decision selecting a bridge, and so it's called the Salem River Crossing Oversight Team. And they have 6 members, both of the counties, Polk and Marion, both of the cities, Kaiser and Salem, and then the 2 transportation agencies, ODOT and then Chariots, Salem Kaiser Transit. And those 6 decision makers, only one of them thinks that tolls is on the table. So you got 1 out of 6 votes for tolls. So let's set aside tolls.
Good.
and that's really where the discussion. Suddenly people say, oh, they've been talking about bridge forever. When you say toll, suddenly you got their attention.
Yes.
And it's like, no, we don't want a toll. So then you say a local gas tax. If you put a 12-cent or 15-cent local gas tax, people will drive to other areas to fill up their cars. So,
Right.
so that's not an option. And then you talk about vehicle taxes. If you have a $50 registration charge for your car, people say that isn't going to fly either. So what this bridge comes down to is that in order to meet these expectations of saying we need this extra capacity in order to grow in the future, it would realistically need to be a property tax increase. And that property tax increase for a $200,000 house, you'd be assessed about an extra $1 per thousand. So at minimum, you would pay on a $200,000 house $200 a year
Extra.
for 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there isn't a problem, from my view, there isn't a problem today, because I've gone across that bridge at 8 o'clock. When I first moved here in 2007, 2008, I used to sometimes go over to Dallas and Dayton and some other places and sub at various schools. So I was going over during that peak period that you were talking about, and I never considered it that big a deal. I was never in bumper-to-bumper traffic. Sometimes on the way home, because of the way people get off to go up to Portland Road, I guess it is, sometimes there's some congestion on that side. But since I was going straight through down Center Street, it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would disagree with you, but it's really a matter of a threshold of what's your pain tolerance and what are the options to address it. In the mornings, people want to commute in about the same 20-minute window, and so it backs up from Wallace Road back, and the studies say it's only a 3-minute delay of getting from downtown to West Salem projected into the future that this bridge would solve. So you're talking about
3 minutes.
3 minutes. You're talking about $400 million to solve a 3-minute problem. And there are less expensive things that can be done to improve the existing traffic flow. There have been studies since the 90s of saying, how do you get traffic off and on the bridges easier? Basically, there's about 2 blocks on the west side of the bridges that need some help, and some of it's going to be done this year, this summer. There's going to be a big improvement to the intersection of Glen Creek Road and Wallace Road. They're going to have nine lanes on Wallace Road at Glen Creek, and that will have lots of dual turn lanes in each direction. And there's other options to be able to improve the traffic flow on and off the bridges that just haven't been done.
So, okay, so it's not currently much of a problem, and they're basing this on studies that show that we're going to get this huge population increase. Is that what they're talking about? And I mean, I've lived here, like I said, since 2007. I haven't seen a huge population increase. Of course, there's been a recession and like that, but still, I don't see where it's coming from. Why they expect it's going to be so large that it would be a problem. Yeah,
the big study that was...
we're talking big here.
They're talking big study. They looked at the forecast for the future, and they did the study starting in 2006 when things were growing pretty rapidly. And even though we've had a downturn in the economy, we've still had an increase in population in Polk County of 36% over about 10 years. So Polk County is growing, and then you say, well, what does that do to the traffic on the bridges? Well, the traffic on the bridges has been stable for 12 years.
Even with this huge population increase?
Even though population's gone up by over 1/3, the bridge traffic, the bridge use has been flat. It went up a little bit to 88,000 cars per day in 2006, and then it's down by 4% since. People have changed their driving practices. It makes a difference that Independence and Monmouth and Dallas now have a movie theater on that side of the river. Health providers have gone to the other side of the river. There's less need for people to be going across that bridge daily, so those people who do need to go across the bridge, and Polk County really deserves to have good I-5 access. They should be able to get from Independence and Dallas to I-5 conveniently. And as long as they avoid the peak hour in the afternoon and the morning, it's still a good connection. So we need to come up with good ways to take that peak hour and make it so that transit, alternative work schedules with the state. I worked for the state, worked for state government for 32 years. And at times, they would encourage alternative work schedules. They'd say, we want to have 1/3 of the people come in before 8, and we want 1/3 of the people to come in after 9. And that just hasn't been emphasized for a few decades that I'm aware of, or for at least 10 years.
Well, also there's the other bridge, which now is a pedestrian bicycle bridge. Has that also helped to alleviate some of the traffic problems?
The bike bridge helps with those folks who are dedicated to ride all seasons, and that's great. But where the Union Street Bridge really helps is talking about earthquakes and emergency response. There was one incident where there was a jumper on the bridge, 15 years ago, however long ago, and it blocked traffic, and people say it was terrible, and it was terrible. But now they have it set up so that you can run traffic on both directions if one of the bridges is disabled for some reason. And if both of the bridges were somehow disabled, and there's issues about retrofitting both bridges that really need to be addressed, but if they were both inoperable, then emergency vehicles can go over the old train bridge, Union Street Bridge. So we have redundancy for emergency vehicles, and that's good. But the reality is we've spent $7 million planning for a new bridge that doesn't have a funding source. And we have ignored retrofitting the existing bridges so that they're usable after a major earthquake that is very much evident to people who have studied it. It's going to happen eventually, and so you need to be able to get across that river. So let's fix the existing bridges before we put any more money into studying a new bridge.
That would seem to be a high priority item.
Yeah.
To make sure that the bridge that we do have can survive an earthquake. And that might be because I'm from an area that sometimes has earthquakes, and I know that those things do happen. So they have been planning this for a long time. I mean, it doesn't seem like they're no closer to having the funding than they were 7 years ago.
Yeah, you know, if there was a bridge there now, a lot of people would use it. I would use it if there was an extra bridge there, but it is so difficult to get it funded, and it's in such a wide area in the floodplain that it's really unlikely that the money would ever materialize. And so then you say, well, why have we spent so much money pursuing an unrealistic dream?
Right.
And that's a good question. The policymakers need to really account for that. But we have bridges that are in the city that are close to the hospital that have not yet been retrofitted to be operational after a major earthquake. And so if you were just looking at the priorities, you'd say, okay, bridge traffic is flat. Let's set that whole discussion of a bridge aside for 10 years. And we'll revisit it if traffic picks up. But in the meantime, let's fix the existing bridges that cross the river so that they can withstand a major earthquake. Let's clean up the ends so that traffic moves better. Right now, the bridges choke at 4,000 cars per hour.
Okay.
So, but the studies in the 90s identified ways you could get to 6,000 cars per hour and not have congestion. So for tens of millions of dollars, you can make those improvements to get the peak hour capacity up to 7,000 vehicles per hour. And until we do that, we really need to not talk about a new bridge. And that $7 million could have gone into retrofitting a bridge or two around the Salem Hospital so that it would be usable after an earthquake.
Well, they had to fix one of the bridges here recently.
Yeah, so there is one that is recently completed.
That was a major problem, and it was very immediate.
Yeah.
And there are some others down there that.
Part of your question got to, well, why are we where we are right now? Kind of what are the dynamics of that? And what happened is Polk County Commission ended up endorsing the proposal that came out of Salem City Council called the Salem Alternative. So basically they want to build a bridge from Pine Street over to Hope Avenue. So people who know where Pine Street is, it's just 1 mile north of the existing bridges, and Hope Avenue is on West Salem side, and it's about a mile from the existing bridges on that side. It would run about a 4-lane bridge across that connection, and you would be able to avoid the existing bridges in downtown. What that means is that for downtown, they love to have that traffic of the bridge going by, the businesses downtown. And the study, again, said that if you make it easy for West Salem residents to shop at Kaiser Station and shop at points in North Salem and north of Salem, then it changes the development pattern for Salem so that there is a risk that the future construction that would have gone into making improvements and renewal efforts in downtown, that money is going to go elsewhere. And our Salem comprehensive plan that is to guide land use decisions says that the business district, the central business district, is to be the economic center of our region. And by even considering putting a bridge that is a bypass of downtown, really would harm downtown business owners.
You know, and when I was considering moving to Salem, one of the things that really attracted me was that they had a real downtown, that things were walkable within the downtown area. And I think that is an attraction for Salem, because I think a lot of people think like I do, that if you can walk to places, then you don't have to drive every time you want to go do something. And I think that's a benefit to Salem, having a healthy downtown. Because let's face it, you go down Lancaster and you could be on Folsom Boulevard in Sacramento, or wherever other place you can think of. But Salem has its own unique identity, and you don't see that a lot of places where you have a fairly healthy downtown. I won't say it's real healthy, but it is fairly healthy, and you have a lot of activities in downtown.
Yeah, and Salem has a lot of pride for downtown. It's a major employment center with the state offices there,
Right.
And when you look at the way we treat our bridges, we kind of treat our bridges like they're disposable. We're not taking care of it, and if you put a bypass of downtown, you're really treating downtown like it's disposable. We are very lucky to have a thriving downtown. It could be better. We need some brew pubs downtown. There's always an opportunity to make improvements, but to take and move economic activity north just doesn't fit with that small town effort. See, basically what happened is Lancaster Mall didn't kill downtown. Kaiser Station didn't kill downtown. If you bypass the existing bridges with a new bridge that bypasses downtown, you might well do some serious damage to downtown.
And it might not actually cure a problem, because they might not need that bridge in the future, and especially if they make the improvements that you were talking about. Because like a lot of the like, I'm now retired. I think a lot of people in my age group are retiring. They're not worried about getting to the other side to go to work and things like that. And I mean, I don't know if it shows in that study, but if Polk County's grown by 36%, what percentage of that are people that are of working age? And like, there's a lot of baby boomers going to be retiring. They won't necessarily be going to work and using the bridge. So there's other considerations here besides just growing the population. What is that population, and where are they going? Yeah,
and it's really important to look at what the funding bases are for a bridge. When you say it's a local activity, like the Selwood Bridge in Portland, it was 77% local funded. If we were very lucky and we got some state money and we got some federal money, and it was 77% local funded, you'd be looking at asking people in Marion County to raise their property taxes by $200 for an average home for 20 years, and they'd say, what benefit do I get out of that? I live in South Salem, and as a resident of South Salem, south of Kubler Boulevard, I would be paying to fund a bridge that I seldom use. And so there just becomes an equity issue. Users, if you're not going to have it be toll-based, and you start to spread it against the whole population, you're actually competing for the same dollars that would fund police and fire and parks and libraries. We do not have a sufficient funding for our existing public services, and then to spend all of our money on an expensive bridge just doesn't work out in my mind.
Yeah, and if nothing else, they could have some sort of shuttle bus between West Salem and Sacramento to help alleviate some of those.
Or you mean Salem, West Salem.
West
Since you
Salem.
came from Sacramento,
right.
you're using that example.
But I mean, you could have shuttle buses running back and forth, because a lot of them probably are government workers and are going to a central location in downtown Salem.
Yeah.
And so that would be something that would cost probably a lot less than $400 million.
Yeah.
And I mean, but a lot of the things you're talking about are improvements and like that, and those need to be done.
Yeah, Salem Kaiser Transit District has really been neutral about the bridge. They consider the proposal being a highway project. It is one mode of transportation. There's a little bit of bike lanes, there's a little bit of sidewalks, but they the discussion at the oversight team was, should transit be integral to this? Should there be a dedicated discussions about a dedicated bus lane? Are there ways to actually tap into transit and current technology? And the oversight team, there was only one member of the oversight team who thought it would be a good idea to have the transit planners at the table when you design the infrastructure. It's really was very much just single occupancy cars was the focus for this plan.
Well, that brings up another issue that I think they're not considering. And they're basing it on historical fact that we've had very cheap energy for a long period of time. And that era is coming to an end. And so you need to look into the future a little bit to realize that the cheap energy is basically gone, and that you will have more expensive energy, so you're going to have probably fewer people relying on single occupancy vehicles to get from one place to another. And they need to start looking at other avenues now.
Yeah, when they did the projections for this bridge, they way overestimated growth. And then when we looked at the details and we said, you know, you're way optimistic, they said, you're right. We're 10 years off in how quickly growth is going to happen. But we still need a bridge. And then we say, well, what's the future, you know, value of something that you really don't know the future 10 years out? It's just premature. You don't know if autonomous self-driving vehicles are going to be around that can use the existing bridges more efficiently. You don't know what the price of energy is. So to make decisions now about something that you admit you're not going to need for 15 years is really getting ahead of it.
And they've already spent 7 years. And we still haven't seen any real need for it at this point yet.
Yeah.
So where do you see this process going at this point?
Yeah, what the advocates of the bridge are hoping for is that they'll be able to get a land use decision in the next year that will allow them to go outside the urban growth boundary. So right now the existing bridges are inside the urban growth boundary. Just 1 mile to the north would require an exception to the statewide planning rules to go across the Willamette Greenway, to go through farmland, and to expand the urban growth boundary. And the reference point that Polk County and the City of Salem is going to have is there's an option called Alternative 2A that would add 3 lanes to the existing bridges. So you'd have 11 lanes crossing the river. And that might make your the optimists who feel about the growth is going to happen, that might make them happy. But what you have is you have the opportunity to compare an option that costs $150 million to an option that costs $400 million, and the less expensive option does not go outside our urban growth boundary.
And that's an important thing, I think, because that also makes Salem and the surrounding area livable. And that is something I think is necessary as far as the future goes anyway.
Yeah, and what happens is you wouldn't have to displace about 30 businesses and about 25 homes if you use the existing corridor. So that I think the issues are really clear when you start to talk about money and you start to talk about the urban growth boundary.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking about the third bridge over the Willamette. And hopefully it isn't in our future. And I'd like to thank you for watching this episode of The Valley View, and come back next week. We'll have a new show.